So in the past few years, I have tried a lot of Unreal features, and not just as a hobbyist, but also working on other people's projects as a freelancer. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about some features that I think are currently not worth it, meaning that maybe in the future they're gonna become better or something, that right now I think have better alternatives. First thing that we're gonna talk about is Lyra. From the description, it says that Lyra is a sample gameplay project that is built alongside Unreal Engine 5 to serve as an excellent starting point for creating new games. Now, I would just summarize Lyra as a framework, like a modular framework to implement your own components, levels, and other stuff. And the reason why I don't think it's currently worth it is that it's just very bloated and very complicated, and when you have to learn Unreal and also have to learn this framework, that I think also slows you down decent amount. I think it's just not worth it. So I think I spent around 2 to 3 months trying to work on a project with Lyra, and it was not good at all. So at least my experience was not good at all with it. The biggest issues I had is that it's just like a huge system, and Unreal is already huge, already has a bunch of features, and it's already like a tool that helps you develop games. So Lyra is a framework on top of Unreal that should also kind of help you build stuff, but now you have to work within its own framework, which gets very complicated. And also extending Lyra, depending on your project, might not have stuff that you need, so then you're gonna have to extend Lyra, and that's gonna get also crazy complicated, because now you not only have to know their system, you also know how to properly implement a new thing that should work with all of its different parts. So for people that are working alone or in a small team, I would say probably less than 5 or maybe less than 10 people, I would say that Lyra is not worth it. It's just going to be a headache. There's going to be a bunch of bugs, and you can just simplify everything by just using base Unreal without this framework. So in general, how the framework works is you have these game feature data, and then this attaches some components, register stuff, attaches input mappings, and you can disable, enable them with different plugins. And they have examples here how they implement the stuff. And I found this very annoying to debug. That's the first thing. The next thing, the attachment of components and how they trigger and where they go and stuff like that, all those rules get abstracted away from you. So now you have to work within like these systems to figure out what the hell is happening and what's where and what's what. So I think there might be some good reasons to use Lyra if you're like a team of 15 maybe or more people, where you can have 1 to 2 or 3 people that are just full-time working with Lyra, and they're going to be modifying it, fixing issues with it. But even then, like if I had to lead, let's say like a 50-person team, I wouldn't go with Lyra, I would just work with Unreal directly. So yeah, but maybe there is like some case to be made that maybe with like 20 people in a team or something, like Lyra becomes viable. But yeah, I just don't see it being worth it, especially for smaller teams. If you just try to use it and you're like 3-person team or something, like 2 or 3 of you are basically 90% of the time just deal with like this subsystem that's Lyra instead of the features for your game or stuff like that. Okay, so let's go to the next thing. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is state trees. So this is Unreal's new solution to AI, or as a more general state-based solution. So when you need to have a system that has different states and you need to manage transition between states stuff, I don't think it's fully there yet. There is a bunch of stuff that still needs to be done, especially to make it more general. So right now I think it works. It was developed mostly for like AI stuff, but I think they are kind of aiming to be more general. So why I think this feature is also currently not worth it is, I guess it's kind of the same as Lyra, just a framework that gets overcomplicated really fast and it just gets confusing. So for example, last time I used it, it was some time ago, so I did notice some changes, but I don't think the changes are going in a way I would personally like them to. Now maybe this works for a lot of people, but I just didn't find it working well. Basically the idea is how you go through the state is you start with the root, you go to the child of the root, then you're gonna go inside and you're gonna try to go and trigger the tasks inside of it, and you can then from the task you have transitions to jump to different types of tasks, or to go to the root again and make a loop or something like that, and just do something like that basically. And each state can have parameters, enter conditions, tasks, and then transitions. So if I click in here, I can say when this state fails, or maybe on some custom event we want to transition, or when it fails, I can say basically in which other state I want to go. Now, my biggest issue with state trees is that again, they're just overcomplicated for the things that you want to do. So usually when I create an AI, if it's very generic, sure, like behavior trees, state trees, they're probably gonna work okay because you just want enemy to maybe move to the player or just like roam, patrol or whatever, and then just when it sees the player, attacks the player, and that's about it. For the most generic type of enemy, sure, stuff like this is fine, but at that point, why not just use blueprints directly? Do you even need some complicated state machine to figure that out? Probably not. So biggest issue for me here is that it gets overcomplicated. Of course, debugging gets hard. I see they added some new things that I don't remember seeing before, which is debug text, so they're trying to make it easier to debug. Now, when I was trying to work with it, it was very confusing to which states are triggered when, what are transitions doing. I think it also like triggers one task at a time and see if it succeeds or something. I forgot since I haven't worked for a bit. You also have the evaluators, global tasks, parameters. So I think parameters are used basically so tasks can have like a global, it's like a blackboard for like behavior trees. So there is stuff like that. There is context, so you have custom variables here to add to the context of what's happening. So actor AI controller, so this is the pawn and the controller of the pawn. So complications can come first for just complexity of this. So every time you add a tasks, I think I had a task in here. So every time you add a task, you have your enter state, exit state, completed, what happens on tick, then you have the actual branches. So this might be like, I don't know, we can write something random. Can I rename this walk? Maybe you have some states like this and maybe in here it's attack or whatever. So now you have to figure out, okay, so this one can have its own custom tasks. The walk can have its own custom tasks. Transitions can go anywhere. So when you get an error or a bug or something is not working as you intended to, you have like 10 different points to figure out what happened, and it gets very confusing. Now, when I was using this before, I had a lot of issues with parameters and how they worked. I think I tried to change them in 2 different places, but then one did not even trigger while the other one triggered. I think because one triggered, the other one just didn't trigger or something like that. I'm not sure if that was a bug or a feature or whatever. But yeah, I had a bunch of issues like that. And when I worked also, it felt similar like behavior trees where they have the similar issue with debugging, with rising complexity, stuff like that. So today what I do is not use behavior trees or state trees. I use just blueprints. Then I can shape my blueprints exactly to the AI and have appropriate debugging for exactly what I need, instead of generalized what I would have in here, which is just kind of generally figuring out the states or what the state you're in. Or in behavior trees you had like a visualization of different state. So just overcomplicating, at least for me. So I don't think this is currently worth it, and I don't think they're kind of going towards the direction I would like them to. What I would like to have for like this, let's say we are in some state, it would be nice if stuff is more inclusive than already there. So right now everything's kind of bloated, everything is everywhere, but I would like to have more blank slate, and then I can impose my own things that I want to add. So do I even want to have transition or not? And I'm completely okay if I don't have any transitions, that nothing happens and I just get an error or something and it says, okay, you need at least one transition, stuff like that. Right now it assumes, I think if you're not having any transition, it automatically goes to root. So there's a bunch of stuff like that that assumes selection utility. If I'm not using this now, I just have to have it in here all the time and clusters all this stuff. It forces me to choose the type, the selection, behavior, stuff like that. I would like it to be like more clean, less stuff, and then I can just include just the things I need. If I want these weights for different states, I'm gonna add it. If I need whatever thing, if I need counter condition, I'm gonna add it. Why do I have it right in my face, basically? Because then if you have 50 different states, every state is gonna be clustered with 50 things, and now you need to figure out what's happening, and it gets complicated. While we are talking about state trees, let's go to behavior trees. So now this feature was in Unreal for a while, so saying like currently not worth it is kind of weird, but at least for me personally, this is generally not worth it at all. And I had somewhat controversial video that I made like a week or 2 ago relating to behavior trees and why I don't use them. And yeah, so before I go into more detail why I don't like to use them, the 2 reasons why I would recommend using them is, first, if you are new to Unreal and you just have no experience with blueprints or low amount of experience with blueprints, behavior trees are going to have actual tutorial stuff like that. So creating your custom stuff while you're not good enough with blueprints is going to be just frustrating. You're not going to get anywhere. So I think in that case, you probably should just learn whatever Unreal gives you and get the idea of general state management with behavior trees. I think that's fine. And then when you get confident enough with blueprints and good enough, then you can start creating your own custom solutions. That I look at blueprint trees as like an okay solution. It's like 5 out of 10, but I think with blueprints you can get to like 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, way better solutions. And I think it bears out when you look at bigger studios. I don't think any big studio uses behavior trees, or like a bigger studio, bigger games, usually they have their own custom solutions or like heavily modified behavior trees. Because the biggest issue with all of these features, so we talked about state trees, Lyra, and behavior trees. The biggest thing is that Unreal is like a generalized piece of software that's supposed to work with wide range of games, and behavior trees are made to work with wide range of types of AI. And also Lyra is made to work with different types of games that you want to make. And when you generalize something, it's kind of, the opposite. So you don't like make anything specifically curated for your own thing. So then when huge studios with 100, 200, 300 people need to make a game using like a 5 out of 10 solution, when they can just throw 10 people and create their own solution, why would they do that? They can just create exactly what they need with the exact type of performance that they need and everything else. So yeah. And I think if you get good enough with blueprints, you can also be fast enough to create AI that is complex, performant, and also is fitting to the AI that you're making, basically. So just as an example, recently I think it was like my previous video, talked about how I do states. So you have like a function for the new state, you just have to manage all state, set the new state, and then on tick you can have like what happens in different state. You don't even have to have it on tick, but stuff like that. But that's kind of the most general way that I would go if I was making more generic type of enemy. But for example, I was working recently on a project where I had more complicated AI that I need to create, and how I did it is basically created like a stack of intents. So the AI can have base intent, which is, let's say he wants to travel to another island, and that's his base intent, and then he can stack some other intents on top of it to basically get more specific to get to his goal. So for example, if he wants to go to the other island, he needs to first board the ship, let's say. So when he boards the ship, that intent is going to be stacked on top of the other one, and then it's going to be removed from the stack or like popped from the stack when that condition succeeds. So then he can board the ship. After that, that intent is going to be popped off, and the another intent is going to be placed for just waiting on the ship or doing something. And then when the ship comes to the, or like stops at the new island, the new intent is going to be to just leave the ship or go wherever, stuff like that. With blueprints, you can just do exactly what you want, how you want it. And if you had like this more complicated behavioral thing to do with behavior trees or state trees, you're going to have to do more workarounds because they're generalized. They're generally made for everything, every type of like AI or complex behavior, stuff like that. That's, I guess, my thoughts on that. The final thing we're going to talk about is Mover. So this is Unreal's new system for creating your own custom character. So before you had the character movement component, which is good and nice, but like a general solution. So a lot of times you want to modify it and you have to have some of your own code on top of it, and it might conflict with how the movement component works, so it gets kind of weird and also limiting. What I would think about is just creating more modular system, which is their movement component, where you can create your own movement from scratch and then use it in different scenarios, have transitions between movements and a bunch of other stuff. So in here I have their example level for physics-based characters, so we have something like this. Now it's gonna act pretty similar to the normal character because they're now trying to get it to the point where it's good enough as the character movement component. So then after that they can polish it more and hopefully make it more user-friendly. So right now they're showcasing stuff like moving boxes, which was with the other character component, older one, kind of an issue in the multiplayer. You would see like a lot of stuttering and weird behavior when you try to interact with physics objects because the character was not a physics object, so it did not work nicely with the other character. But with this character, they're trying to make that work from the start, so kind of physics works fine, stuff like that. And now this is on my currently not worth it list. The main reason for that is that firstly, blueprint support is not that good. I did spend some time and try to make whatever they had to work with blueprints, and I had to do a lot of workarounds, and I made it like 80% work. There's some weird stuff happening, but in general I made it work. But it's not made for blueprints, so I had to basically be creative to make it work and do some weird stuff. But yeah, first they need to work on user friendliness. They need to expose a bunch of stuff to blueprints, and also creating movement from scratch, especially complex movement, is really complicated because you have to deal with collisions, you have to deal with physics, you have to deal with user input, and if you're working with multiplayer, you have to care about security, people not being able to easily cheat, with like prediction, with smooth character motion, so clients do not see stuttering or some weird behavior. So all of that gets pretty complicated, and how basically their new mover component works is you're gonna have different movement modes. So in here they have example of walking, falling, flying, and zipping, and you can basically transition between them. Now you have the transition to zipping. I think this is when maybe you go from walking and then press a button and you need to transition to zipping mode. You don't want to just snap to zip line, probably smooth out or something. Yeah, so creating, let's say, walking. For walking, you're gonna have to create a bunch of stuff from scratch. You're gonna have to figure out, let's say, gravity. So if you add a gravity to the character, he's just gonna fall through the floor. So then you have to figure out collision. So when the character kind of hits the floor, the collider stops where it hits the floor. But then you need to figure out user input. So when you have your user input, if you hit a wall, you're gonna go through the wall. So you need to figure out when you hit the wall, do you want character to slide along the wall if you're at an angle? What happens when you hit a small bump on the ground? Usually there is a step up functionality. So there is bunch of stuff that you need to figure out, and they need to make it as user friendly as possible, and probably create functions that already solve a lot of these things, and that way you can use that if you want. And if you need something more specific, you can create your own custom thing. And when I was working with this in their walking mode, they had all of these things already in their setup. So I would want from them to get something that is more modular but exposed to blueprints, so I can have all of the things that are right now in walking. There is I'm gonna say 20, 30, 40 functions that are all managing how the character moves and the stuff I mentioned, collision, stuff like that. But if it's kind of condensed, there is some general logical things that you can combine together. So let's say function for dealing with generally collision would be nice. Instead of having 10 functions, one is a step up, colliding with the ground, colliding with the walls, getting stuck somewhere, sliding along steep surface. If you had some more general, maybe 3 or 4 types of colliders that we can use for more generic characters, and then if you need something more specific, we can create our own big function ourselves. So having something like that would be nice, where you kind of get best of both worlds. So the character movement component, so the old system, is not necessarily bad. It is good because it's kind of monolithic. It already has the character generally solved for different purposes. The issue with it is that it's just not modular, so when you need to change it, it gets rough. And I think Mover has the ability to get the best of both worlds, where they can make it user-friendly enough and expose a bunch of stuff and solve some issues by themselves, but then have this whole system with the movement modes. So walking, falling, flying, you can create your own custom, whatever in here you need. It could be dashing or something else. Or you can have different walking for maybe 2D character, first person, third person, whatever. So they create these sub-elements with these modes and expose it to you, so make it user-friendly that way. I think it can go a long way. Now, I also am not fan of a lot of these additional things like movement mixer, input producer, persistent data types. There is some stuff that they try to solve for you by default. So this whole system, as I understood it, would work well with multiplayer if you are using their system. So I understand that there is some additional complicated things that need to exist, but if there is any way to make it as compact and as user-friendly as possible, it would go a long way. So you don't have to again learn a whole new system to create a character movement, instead of maybe let's say using a character movement component or the pawn movement or something, and then you adding your own few things. And I'm specifically talking mostly from the perspective of smaller teams or solo devs. If you're a big team, Mover, State 3 or stuff like that is more accessible because you can have a bunch of people thrown onto it and they can just figure it all out and go through all of the pain points. So yeah, that's about it for features that I think currently are not worth it.